Next, we have Elizabeth. Let me
Hey,
find your
Michael.
chapter here. Emotional drunkenness. This is something that I can relate to. I have been, you've heard my story. And, being a single dad, trying to work a day job and start my companies and see hypnotherapy patients and everything that I was doing, I've definitely been there before. So this is an important chapter, I think, because there's not enough people talking about this. Tell me what
No,
got you into it.
oh my, that's a long story. So I'll try to give you the cliff notes.
Yeah.
I come from a long line of trauma, unfortunately. I know you were talking with Laura earlier about the
Mhm.
DNA of trauma, and that was definitely in my family history as well. And so, I came from a family. My mother was undiagnosed bipolar. She wasn't diagnosed until 10 years ago. So there was a whole thing
Wow.
around that. My father was a Vietnam veteran struggling with mental health and suicidal ideation, as well as sleep deprivation. And then in my adulthood, I ended up in Mexico working with a project and dealing with a cartel and an abusive relationship.
Whoa.
So, yeah, so I ended up coming back into the United States, bringing my two young sons with me, a solo parent with very little support system. So the idea of getting sleep was just non-existent in my world. And on top of that, I was learning how to heal and also getting my son's help on how to heal. And that's actually where I came across you. And I started with hypnotherapy. I got certified through the Learn Hypnosis Now program here in Ohio. I went to one of the programs. I was lucky enough to meet you, and you were my
My
trainer.
last one that I trained. Yeah.
Um, and so I've just continued from there. For a few years, I was just doing general hypnotherapy. And then, unfortunately, in December, my father passed away.
Mhm.
And he had struggled his whole life with insomnia. And he had this false belief that he couldn't be hypnotized. Coming from a man who would drive home and not know how he got home, or he would sit in front of the TV and zone out, he never realized that that was actually a trance state. Um, and so seeing that he never resolved his sleep issues and seeing all of the veterans that I work with who were also having those sleep issues, I wanted to make a difference. I wanted to help them get past their trauma and start sleeping and regain their emotional sobriety.
I love that term, emotional sobriety. That's uh that's so powerful because I don't think, most we live in a society where sleep deprivation, I think, is just an accepted norm.
Yeah.
People dedicate so much of their life to something that they're dispassionate about, that they call a job, that then they feel they have a right to reclaim hours of the day. But they feel like they feel like if they only reclaim it awake, that they're reclaiming it. It's like people feel like sleep is a waste of time. I know I felt like that for much of my life. And when I was a computer programmer and raising my kids, like between that and I had a couple side gigs and I was starting my hypnotherapy practice. I mean, I would often only get 3 hours of sleep a night, if that sometimes. And um, my last computer programming job that I had, one of my sticking points was that I negotiated 6 weeks of vacation. And the reason for that was I was so sleep deprived all the time that I would literally not be able to go to work at least one day a month. I
Yeah.
just would wake up and I couldn't get out of bed because and I would take the whole day and just sleep through that whole day. And it ate up all my vacation. I had 6 weeks of vacation, but I never had vacation time because I was constantly using those days just to try to recoup, with like a 24-hour sleep cycle every month. Crazy.
It is. It is. And people don't understand just how big of a problem sleep deprivation is. It affects every one of your biological processes. If you're struggling with chronic pain, it's kind of a chicken and the egg. Chronic pain is exacerbated by lack of sleep.
Mhm.
And then, not only is it exacerbated by it, but it can actually cause it. Lack of sleep can cause chronic pain. Weight gain, there's biological processes that happen during your sleep. So if you're not sleeping, it's really, really difficult to lose weight, as well as the emotional aspects. And people don't understand just how much lack of sleep really, really affects every aspect of their life.
Yeah, it's and there's the vicious cycle too. It's not only does it contribute to the lack of to the pain, but then the pain can contribute to the sleep deprivation as well. There's so many people their insomnia is based in back pain or neck pain or something like that.
Absolutely. And what I find, like, I love working with veterans. And what I find is they have this stigma, like a lot of first responders, where they don't feel like they can show any weakness. They
Mm,
can't reach out for help because they don't want to be seen as someone who needs help. They want to be seen as the person that can be relied upon. And so breaking through that mental health stigma and helping them see that when you start getting your sleep and you really work on these issues, which can be changed instantly through NLP and hypnotherapy, it will transform your life and transform your relationships. And
mm.
that's what I'm passionate about.
So yeah, let's talk about that. Probably the first hurdle for most people is just giving themselves permission. What's that like getting people over that hurdle sometimes?
It's really depends on how deep they are into their pain. Unfortunately, it's a lot like addiction. They have to really hit their rock bottom before they're willing to look at it and make the change. And I want to change that now for people. I want to help them see that it's okay to see the beginnings of an issue and change it quickly so that
Mm,
you can live your best life now. So getting people over that hurdle, helping them to understand that it's really not a weakness. It's actually a strength, being vulnerable and asking for help. And that's where the whole dialogue around mental health and sleep deprivation needs to change. It's
yeah.
a strength to ask for help.
One of the interesting things I just listened to Tony Robbins' new book on health, and they made a case in there that sleep deprivation actually leads to aging the body.
Yes.
It's not just that you're tired, it's that you're getting old faster. And there comes a certain point where if it's a pattern in your life, there comes a point where you kind of cross over that threshold where now you can do less and less about it. Even if you do, start to get more sleep every night, it'll benefit you, but it won't benefit you as much as if you do it early.
Right.
Because you don't want to be one of those people that's like 40 years old, but you look like you're 60 and feel like you're 60, because it's again, it's not just an energy thing in the body. Literally, the cells in the body begin acting older and degrading. So it's not just a mental issue, although mental health, I think, is a huge part of it, like you pointed out. But it literally physically affects the body.
It does, absolutely. And I know it's funny. I'm almost 50. I just turned 48 in February. Most people say I look them in my like I'm in my 30s, but what I've noticed is for the last 6 months or so, I've been struggling with sleep as I was getting ready. My son had obstructed sleep apnea, so we
Mm,
were working towards his surgery that he just had 2 weeks ago. And I saw that as I was getting less sleep, I started getting more wrinkles around the eyes.
yeah,
And it's like, okay, I need to make sure that I'm getting my sleep because I'm not ready for wrinkles yet.
right. So this is one of the most interesting things in your chapter, I think, is this term emotional drunkenness. And I know when I was probably 17 or 18 years old, I was, just gaining my agency as a human being, had a car for the first time, had freedom, and I became obsessed with being awake all the time. I would go to Rocky Horror Picture Show 4 nights a week, which was, would end after midnight, and we'd all go to Denny's until 4 a.m. drinking coffee, and I would skip sleep. And I know one of the last times that I did that, I was awake for almost 4 days straight.
Wow.
And I was driving home at 4 in the morning, it was completely pitch black out, and I started hallucinating.
Yes.
I was driving down the freeway, down the 4-lane freeway in the middle of the night, nobody around. And I suddenly saw a giant, literally like a 20-foot tall man walk in front of my car. And I slammed on the brakes and almost crashed. And about 10 miles later, I almost got in another accident. And it was like I was drunk. And
Yes.
so, one of the things that you said in your chapter, which I thought was so fascinating, is that being awake 18 to 24 hours is
Yes.
equivalent to actually being drunk and having a blood alcohol content. Um, Talk about that for a minute, because that's fascinating to me.
Yeah, it's crazy the studies they've done on this. If you're awake for 18 hours, it's the same as having a 0.5% blood alcohol level. You know, we all know that you don't get in the car after you've had a few beers and drive
Hopefully.
down the road, hopefully. But people don't think twice about not sleeping at night,
Yeah.
getting in the car and driving to work. And it's worse the farther you go. 24 hours, it's a 10%, the same as 10% blood alcohol level. That's
That's
huge.
huge.
So you're not only putting yourself at risk, but you're putting everyone around you. Think about
Right.
all the parents who haven't slept at night and are driving their kids to school and then driving to work after that.
Right.
This is really dangerous, and we don't think of it as that way. So I really want to bring the awareness that this is emotional drunkenness.
Right.
Not only are your reaction times limited, but your emotional reaction times are
Yeah.
impaired as well. It's easier to become agitated, frustrated, start yelling more often.
Yep.
It's hard to understand what other people are feeling because you're so impaired. And that leads to broken relationships.
Yeah.
And we need to repair that. I had a client, you'll read about him in the book. His name was Tony. He hadn't slept more than 2, 3, 4 hours a night since leaving the military 5.5 decades before. He was having a hard time with his relationships, hard time with his businesses, serial entrepreneur. After one hypnosis session, he was sleeping 7 hours a night religiously.
Crazy.
And he still
Got
to
it.
this day calls me and says, my life has changed because of you. I love you. He says that to me all the time. And the best part is his wife is so much happier as well.
Well, yeah. I mean, think about it. Nobody would want to live with a full-time drunk,
No.
right? And if you're getting sleep deprivation for the people in your life, it may be similar to that. You know, we're not only talking about the physical impairment and the reduced, reaction time, but again, the mental impairment, the lack of reasoning, the lack of judgment, the lack of emotional intelligence, if you will, snapping at things. I mean, that's not something you want to do to the other people in your life. And to prolong your own life, you also want to make sure that you're getting that sleep so you're not aging faster than you need to, right? As of right now, aging is still mandatory, although they're saying in the next 10 to 15 years it may not be, but you can certainly slow it down. So we got about 3 minutes. Tell us about who you like to work with, who's your ideal client, and where can people find you other than in the book Becoming Positively Awesome.
I love working with military veterans. A lot of times they're just coming out of the service and they have a lot of stuff to unpack, and getting them sleeping again is really the first step into recovery and living a purpose-filled, enjoyable life. I also work with civilians. I have a lot of people that reach out to me and say, hey, I've seen your posts. I need this for myself. What do I do? So I do work for everyone, but my passion is veterans.
Yeah.
That comes from the heart with my father. To reach me, you can reach me on my website, usleepnow.com. That's the letter U, sleepnow.com. And you can also reach me on LinkedIn, and my ID is Coach Garvey.
I love it. And I think military in particular are more susceptible to this than probably anybody else for two reasons. Number one, when people go into the military, I don't know if most people know this, but the military actually uses mind control techniques, right? They use brainwashing techniques, particularly in boot camp, when they're trying to mold the person into the soldier they want them to be. They literally have to kind of ditch the old identity and reform this person. And one of the things they do for brainwashing is sleep deprivation and interrupting sleep cycles throughout that whole, 12 weeks in boot camp. But then that continues also into the regular military career. And then the second, if they've seen, any kind of action, here's the interesting thing. They're finding that soldiers don't even have to be in action. They don't have to be holding a gun on the front lines. They've actually shown now that the guys who fly drones, these are not they're not anywhere near the war zone. They're sitting in a desert in Arizona somewhere, flying this thing by remote control, and they're ending up with PTSD.
Yes.
They're still connected to it in a way, into something that is inhumane in a lot of cases. And so I think between the trauma and the brainwashing, I think there are probably a lot of military people that deal with this.
Not only the trauma and the brainwashing, but they become hyper vigilant. They're watching for everything. My father became so hyper vigilant, he slept with his eyes open. We couldn't always tell if he was awake or asleep because they were always open. And that kind of identity as the 100% soldier always on needs to change, especially when they come out of the military.
Right. Which is the definition of PTSD, right? Always in fight or flight. So thank you so much, Elizabeth, for hanging out with us.
Thank
And
you.
congratulations, best-selling author.